Welcome back to this episode of Petronoia with Judith Curry. Let's dive back in for part 2.
In the ocean and the ice sheets. So we got to stop sea level rise. We need to figure out how to deal with it.
So that's why, this goes back to like allocation, right? Where we can't assume that there's just an endless pot of money. You're making the argument, and I'm paraphrasing, so correct me, money and investment should be in resilience and adaptation. And this seems to be very underfunded, right? Mitigation is underfunded.
Okay, well, there's, 2 issues. One is, the energy systems. We need more energy. We need cheap energy. There's energy poverty in the world that we need to address. And we need more R&D to get better, cheaper ways of producing electricity, liquid fuels, and so forth and so on. Okay, that's a need independent of climate change and CO2 emissions. And then the other problem we have is climate and weather extremes, the extreme events, the hurricanes, droughts, and so forth. And we need to figure out how to make ourselves less vulnerable. And, we can do that in several ways. There's hard adaptation, the seawalls, the dams, and things like that. And then there's soft adaptation, which is just really more of a management thing. It's trying to, with better warnings and better, some of them are pretty simple. They're more operational, emergency management type approaches. And, and then the other one is, land use policy. We've already talked about people aren't going to move away from the Florida coast.
Right.
But there's a lot of people living in river floodplains.
Yeah.
That these aren't particularly desirable locations in the way that the Florida coast is. There's really no reason for building there. We could, probably be stricter about land use and river floodplains, things like that. And, forest fire, the issue is, just like people want to live on the Florida coast, they want to live, in these fire-prone regions of California.
Right.
And if you want to do that, you need to invest in resilience of your property and be prepared to pay for insurance.
Right.
Unless you're insuring. The mistake that California did was they set caps, on the insurance, and all the insurers backed out and people didn't have insurance, and then their house burned down. And that sort of vindicated the insurance company. They knew these places were vulnerable to fire and they wanted to charge a realistic amount, but
I would also make the argument that California completely mismanaged their forestry practices, which only aided to the forest fires that they experienced. One of my neighbors, actually a great guy, he was one of those dudes that that come in with the helicopter, and he's a firefighter and he does like the forest fire. He's got the craziest stories. But like, if you want to see him lose his mind, you'll ask him about the forestry practices in the state of California, because for him it's a real life peril, right? He's had buddies that have not only been severely injured but have died for stuff that can be completely avoided. But yeah, and the other thing too that you touched upon, you have these success stories, right? Bangladesh, Netherlands, other countries. It's not like this is a pipe dream. This is not conceptual. There are actual practices in place that other countries have implemented to improve their resiliency and adaptation procedures.
Oh yeah. The Netherlands, a lot of the country is like 6 or 7 feet below sea level. Okay. And they've been able to manage that incrementally over time. The Thames barrier, the Thames River in England, they used to flood, and they figured out how to manage that. So in the 20s and 30s, the U.S. did all these big infrastructure projects, the River Dam, and then the Mississippi River engineering, Lake Okeechobee, and all these kind of big, the dikes, and all of these kind of big projects. We tend not to do so much of that anymore.
Why? Why don't we do that anymore?
Environmental concerns.
Okay.
So this needs to be balanced. They're costly. There's environmental concerns. You need to be you need to look at these projects carefully, these big infrastructure projects. And I give some examples in my book of big projects that the World Bank has funded that have really turned out to not solve the original problem and make other problems worse. So you have to be careful of that. So you have to be careful with these big infrastructure problems. This is why I like the smaller projects, the more nature-based projects, and the more what I would call operational adaptation, better information, better protocol. Like the example of, I'm going to give another Florida example since you're a Floridian. Does Florida Power and Light provide your...
FPL. Just paid the bill yesterday.
Okay, and did you read that? I don't know if you read that section. It's in chapter 13 of my book, where I go through how Florida Power and Light manages to minimize power outages in a hurricane. It's just absolutely astonishing.
Yeah, one of the things that I think DeSantis does not get credit for, and one of the things that Floridians definitely take for granted, is a hurricane will come in and it will do a lot of damage and we'll lose power for maybe 6 hours. And everything within a week is rebuilt and you have power and running water. Whereas you talk to like the old timers, you talk to the old timers in West Palm, they'll tell you the days in the 70s where they're sitting on their porch with their shotgun on day 3 because there's no running water, there's no electricity, and people are starting to act a little bit crazy. Like the rule of thumb in Florida is that day 3 becomes a little bit like the purge, and you have to sit on the porch with the gun to make sure that people aren't going to come steal your stuff, right? But to your point, yeah, on the FPL thing, like they have it down, no pun intended, to a science. It is systematic and it is immediate.
The technology and the operational practice is just, astonishing. And a lot of that really predates DeSantis. So, but DeSantis gets very high marks for what he's done. So to me, that's one of the best examples of adaptation, is this operational adaptation of what.
Do you think then adaptation? I mean, I'm being rhetorical on this question. So it's seemingly its adaptation doesn't get as much recognition, or at least strategic consideration as should. The other thing that you bring up, and once again it comes up in the DOE report, is energy poverty. And this is something that I've spoken to in depth with Scott Tinker. He's been on the show. I mean, the guy's a machine. For like 2 hours, he was going through the various levels of energy poverty and the corresponding ripple effects. Mike Howard, he's the CEO of Howard Energy. The guy is he's amazing all around. He's just a great guy. But his thesis on energy poverty, and he's discussed it on the show, is incredibly comprehensive and thoughtful and very pragmatic. But this notion that we have to decarbonize, I actually think that's a very privileged and somewhat of an elitist perspective, because people who can't afford energy don't give a shit about decarbonization.
Right. And you have to go back to the UN environmental program. I mean, they were driven by, global control and power, but they also hated fossil fuels. And
why do they hate fossil fuels? Like, that's the part they're not angels. I get it. But at the same time, it's
fuels, and it's sort of tied up with capitalism, and, they hate a lot of things. Sometimes I think they hate people. But okay, the issue with adaptation was a dirty word until recently, and Al Gore would articulate this. Well, if we adapt, then we let the fossil fuel companies off the hook. Yeah. And sometimes I think punishing fossil fuel companies was more important than dealing with climate change or helping people.
Right.
I mean, just a fundamental hatred of fossil fuels. Very fun, and Al Gore was, and I think he, maybe 5 years ago, he acknowledged that he was wrong, that adaptation is important also. But that was like a predominant worldview. Anybody focused too much on adaptation, not to mention uncertainty, was a climate denier.
Right. Do you think that the notion of energy poverty, and once again, I think I know the answer on this, so I'm leaving the witness, full disclosure. Well, let me say it a different way. Why do you think energy poverty in the United States is such a, relatively speaking, less discussed topic. Why don't we acknowledge that? Like, we have a huge affordability issue in the United States that seemingly is pushed on the rug. Energy poverty, I think, is leading the way on that.
Okay, yeah, even like in the US and Europe, there's also an energy poverty issue.
Right.
I mean, and it's serious, particularly when there's a heat wave. People will turn up their heat during a cold wave, but during a heat wave, they think electricity is going to be too expensive, and they let their houses get way too hot.
Yeah.
And there's some adverse health effects from it.
Mrs. Romito doesn't allow that to happen, but yeah, generally speaking, I agree with you. Yes.
People don't even have air conditioners and things like that. So it's a big, electricity, abundant apart from the energy poverty issue. I mean, it's what we use for irrigation and pumps and desalination and, all these, what I would say, climate adaptation tools. They require electricity.
Yeah.
To increase our resilience, we require more electricity. So thinking that we're going to somehow reduce the use of electricity.
Well, I mean, to bring it a step further, like, I give this presentation to boards, management teams. I've spoken upon them, like this circuit, and just in doing my own research, I think people don't realize that electricity demand for the last 30 years has been flat. We've had the same degree of electricity demand for basically my life. And now we're talking about the next wave of economic prowess and opportunity lies with generative AI. And everyone is going crazy for generative AI. And look, I think it's awesome. I'm using ChatGPT. I use it for amazing illustrations that I put in my presentations. They're all public. You can check it out. They're hilarious. But, we've been sort of spoiled and conditioned to under a certain circumstance of electricity demand, that's about to go through the roof. So if we're experiencing energy poverty now, like, what is this going to be in 5 years when the electricity demand predominantly from hyperscale data centers just goes through the roof?
Yeah. The data centers, blockchain, quantum computing, robotics, AI, all of this is going to hugely increase power. And I think a lot of the big tech companies see this and they're trying to.
Yeah. Is that why you think nuclear? I saw today, it's timely. Google made a nuclear deal. I don't have the specifics of it. I haven't had a chance to look in. But you made a point earlier, I think it was when you're introducing yourself, about how environmentalists were traditionally anti-nuclear. Do you think nuclear is sort of this golden egg that sort of unites everyone, and that's sort of the solution, or how are you viewing nuclear within that context?
I mean, I'm a big fan of nuclear, especially the next generation 4 technology. There's some fabulous new technologies that are safer, cheaper, on and on it goes, cleaner. It's great for wealthy countries. I mean, it's not cheap to build these power plants. For developing countries, who's going to pay for nuclear for developing countries?
I mean, who's going to pay for nuclear in the U.S., right? You're talking about a very, as you point out correctly, expensive. Who's going to leverage their balance sheet in the hopes of getting a 40-year payback? Like that.
Okay. Well, big tech is doing it. They're going to do it with the data centers and whatever. And I think, this is Doug Burgum, Secretary of Interior, and I guess the energy czar.
Yep.
I mean, his goal is to really cut the cost on nuclear power plants and get it to the point where you can build one in 6 years.
Yeah.
Get it permitted, everything, start to finish 6 years. Okay. If you can do that, then we've got something that's affordable and makes sense. But, the big nuclear power plant that the Southern Company built, for Georgia and everything, that took a huge long time.
It was a mess.
Horribly costly. I mean, it's now working. Okay, but once they got over the hump, it's not working. But the hump was huge and it was crazy expensive.
Do you think that once nuclear begins to scale, we'll see sort of like the exponential decline of environmental, let's call it apocalyptic hysteria?
Well, they hate nuclear. They will always, I mean, it's
why? Because of the waste?
They hate the idea of it. You know, they hate.
It's like if I came to you and I said, do you want to decarbonize? Yes. Do you want small footprint? Yes. Do you want something that can scale and provide immense amount of power without sacrificing environmental? Yes. And I said, well, it's nuclear. And then they freak out. Like, I don't.
Oh, it's a tool of war, you know, the imperialism, you know, on and on. They come up with all these ridiculous arguments. It's not
What's some of the more common arguments that you've come across?
It's not the Fukushima thing.
Yeah.
Really people out, even though it really wasn't that much of a disaster. I mean, that really freaked people out. But even Japan has reopened all those plants. I mean, Germany, you know, decided, well, we're going to close all our nuclear power plants. Germany has just screwed itself unbelievably.
Yeah.
And they're just now rethinking, well, maybe we really do need nuclear.
They shut down their nuclear plants, went wind, that didn't work out, and so now they're all coal.
Yeah, I know. They you know, and they've done all this wind and solar stuff, and their carbon footprint is still increasing because they have to use coal. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
You do in the book talk about this post-apocalyptic politics concept, and the pragmatism part makes sense, but you talk about embracing pluralism. I can't even say it. Like, can you expand about what you mean by that?
I'm trying to think of the context that I might have used pluralism, but basically, you know, once you get rid of the top-down UN type strategy where everybody has to, you know, go to net zero emissions and wind and so on, you know, once you get rid of that globalist idea, then you look down, you know, to the individual countries or the individual state, city, whatever, and they need to look at what's going to secure their own common interests in terms of needs for energy and resilience from extreme weather events. And once you break all this down into human-sized problems, you know, and then you see, you know, like how to increase the resilience of the local electricity supply. Once you break it down into that size of problems, then people can start to agree on the solution.
Yeah.
And, you know, you get some win-win solutions, no regret solutions, and people start to agree, and you get, you know, a lot of different things going on that overall act to increase your resilience. I mean, and that's the way we're going to make progress. And
are you bullish on that? Are you bullish on that goal?
Sure.
Sure.
Well, once you stop blaming, you know, when something goes wrong,
yeah.
Oh, it's like climate change. We can't do anything about it. It's like a scapegoat for everything.
Right.
It gives up
easy
out for lazy, corrupt politicians who aren't dealing with the real problems.
Right. Who don't read charts and graphs.
And have to be accountable because it's climate change. So, you know, once we get rid of that scapegoat, then people can be motivated to.
When do you think that happens? Do you think, I mean, so this is my fear, right? This is, and I'm going to burn a lot of calories on this one. So just bear with me. I think people, you know, you look at Mendami or whatever his name is in New York, right? And people will ask, well, how did you get here? And the answer is actually pretty simple. It's Democrats are incompetent and Republicans historically are incompetent. So there's nowhere else to turn. So younger people turn to another option because option 1 and option 2 didn't work. On the climate thing, they've been conditioned to think a certain way, which they've been beaten over the head with this, presumably since birth. So there's going to be this deconditioning, if you will. And I'm not sure how long that takes or, you know, what needs to be done, like the full extent of it. Clearly education and data and being objective need to do it. But like, is that sort of like the lost generation? Has it gone too far where we're going to have to skip a generation? It's going to take an incredibly long time for like everything to revert back to much more common sense? Or like, how do we think about the time that it's going to be required to just get everyone back in it, or to corral them back onto like common sense ranch?
Well, the COVID example is an interesting one because we saw this whole thing cycle, in 5 years, where, the threat, fear, the crazy stuff, the suppression, and then challenging it, and or into a more rational place. But the climate thing is more entrenched in some ways because this has been going on for decades.
Right.
And the issue of the lost millennials, I don't know quite, how that's going to evolve. But, I think, real world and life will just sort of get in the way of holding those beliefs for too much longer. And, once people see, well, there's no catastrophe, I mean,
yeah, the notion of Chicken Little, the sky is falling, is only gonna last so long.
On to other things, and there'll be other problems that come to the fore. That some of them that we don't even anticipate right now, like the pandemic came from out of nowhere, really. There will be other issues that come to the fore. So I'm hoping that this will slowly die out. But the UN politicians and their rhetoric, really sort of set the stage for all of this. And then you've got all these, a lot of these NGOs have closed down.
Yeah.
You got to wonder how much of this was funded by USAID.
Right.
Journalists have closed, newspapers and have closed their climate desks. They use
What is MSNBC now called? MS Now or something like that? They rebranded or something?
The mainstream media is like really in flux. The new media is becoming ever more powerful, and it's really more of a people's media, which I'm all in favor of. So, this is a period of a lot of flux.
Right.
So
we'll see. I do want to talk about the DOE report, right? The critical review of greenhouse gas emissions on climate. Like, so just how does that work? Do you get a phone call from Chris Wright? He's like, hey, write me this report, or like, how did that?
shit. Got a
Really?
phone call from Chris Wright.
So Chris calls you. He's like, hey, Judith, what's up? I need this report. And you're like, okay.
Yeah, pretty much. He told me what he wanted to do, that he was putting together a group of probably 5 people, and called them he had talked to before he talked to me. And he told me, generally what he was trying to do. And, I agreed to help. How could...
Did you know Chris, or like you get like some unrecognized number on your phone sent to voicemail?
He called me cold. Yeah. And I picked up.
Did you think it was a prank call?
No. I thought it was real.
Okay.
And so then there was a special government employee from the Cato Institute that came in to sort of manage the group. And we had this crazy short timeline to put together a report.
How long was the timeline?
Well, at first it was 2 weeks. And then they gave us...
Of course it was.
Well, then they gave us an extra 4 weeks.
Okay.
And then we had a draft ready in 4 weeks, and then we had some revisions over the next month before it was actually published. So it was put together pretty quickly. We had to put a lot of work in. At first it wasn't clear how it was going to come together, but after about 10 days it started to gel, and then we all were getting pretty excited. This is going to be good. But
had you known the other 4 authors before?
I know them.
Okay.
I've met each of them several times, and at meetings or something like that, but I'd never worked with any of them. I certainly knew of their work.
Why do you think that they were selected? Was it sort of in the realm, or sort of in the spirit of what you said before? Like, we're going to take the dissenters that were somewhat ostracized because of the, or how were they selected?
Well, Chris Wright, in his forward to the report, said he selected us for our open-mindedness.
Okay.
Okay, so, I mean, by definition, that means people who are challenging the consensus.
Right.
So, I mean,
Did you get to meet Trump?
I'm sorry?
Did you get to meet Trump?
No, I haven't traveled at all for this. Everything has been done over the phone and
Really?
Zoom and everything.
Okay.
You haven't seen it.
You said, so I'm going to play devil's advocate once again. We'll play jerk face. You said that you put this together in 6 weeks. Do you think that sort of because it was expedited, there's room for error? Or was this work already in place and you sort of aggregated prior work? And so it just took editing to make it tight.
Yeah, we were building on a lot of stuff we had written in other contexts.
Right.
And, building on a lot of stuff, background knowledge that we had. So, I mean, there was a lot of stuff that we brought to the table on day one. Okay, but getting this turned into a report, is another story. But yeah, no, it came to get, and we don't regard this as the last word.
Right.
We want to get this right. It's out for public comment right now, and I know there's several organized efforts to provide, a review and critique of our report. I've already, based on the feedback I've gotten, I've already changed some of the text, more adding things rather than, things that we had that were wrong.
Like, what are you adding? What's an example?
Oh, okay. In the hurricane section, I added a section on factors contributing to economic losses in the U.S.
Okay.
And so I go into more storm-specific things rather than, there's no increase in the number of landfalling hurricanes, that kind of stuff. So it's just, it's richer information. It's material I had already written for a previous report. I just updated it and added this in response to some suggestions that I received. I added some additional information in the little tornado section about, even though the overall number of tornadoes haven't changed, actually they've been decreasing, the intense ones, but they've shifted to the east. Twice your L, it's shifted to the east and earlier in the season.
Okay.
Whether that's fossil fueled warming or natural variability, we don't know, but I document that. I'm putting more references into the chapter on solar variations and climate. A reviewer pointed out some references that I agreed I should consider. I haven't really written that section yet. So, we are making some changes, and I think the comment period is over the end of August. I suspect a number of people are waiting till the last minute to submit their comments. So.
Probably. That's usually how it works.
But to date, I mean, there's been some useful suggestions, and there's some people who don't like it, but at the end of the day.
And then what's the end utility of the report? So once again, presumably it's, all right, we're not going to allow just one argument to dominate everything. We're going to incorporate dissenting opinions based on evidence and analysis, and then we're going to set that out for public comment. So if you have a problem with it and you don't speak up, forever hold your peace, but also the opportunity to make it much more comprehensive, because obviously you only had 6 weeks. That's quite the cram, if you will. And then ultimately take that and do what with it? That's the baseline for example, like rescinding the endangerment act?
Well, the EPA cited it.
Okay.
In context of the endangerment finding. I hope it will put the IPCC in the national climate assessment process, in a better place where they include dissenting perspectives. Okay, and that they consider a number of inconvenient issues that we raise, things that they've tried to sweep under the rug.
What would be an example?
Oh, global greening.
Global greening. What do you mean by that?
Okay, well, the leap area index from satellite, the globe is much greener. There's more vegetation.
Than what?
Than it was since 1980.
Okay. That's
significantly more vegetation.
Okay.
So, I mean, CO2 helps trees, helps agriculture.
That was like sort of like, I have these talking points and I'll go through each one of them, but coincidentally, the first one is, I'm going to quote, CO2 induced warming appears to be less damaging economically than common believed. And obviously this challenges a variety of existing studies. But when you say less damaging economically than commonly believed, is less damaging like a little bit? Is it significantly? What's the degree on that?
The issue is all of the scenarios,
Okay.
future scenarios put together by scientists that are used by the IPCC. None of them has us worse off in 2100 than we are now. And in fact, in most of the scenarios, it's several 100% better off, okay, than we are now. Expected to be in the future. It's not surprising if you look at how, what we've done in the last 80 years. I mean, poverty is reduced a lot, population has grown, agricultural productivity is all. And during that period, we've already warmed by a degree, centigrade. So why, so there's a reason to think that we're going to all of a sudden crash because we have more warming. Okay, so say if without warming, we would be 4 times better off in the future. And with warming, we'd be 3.9.
I take it.
Yeah, it's just it's a small reduction. Well-being, and this is if you assume, and a lot of this doesn't account for, and this is a point that's made in chapter 9, is that there's a lot of benefits to agriculture from more CO2 and warmer temperatures and more rainfall. So
can you give me a couple examples of the benefits to agriculture? Presumably crop yields.
Yeah, crop yield.
Okay. Once you're playing devil's advocate, wouldn't higher temperatures presumably lead to more drought, which would adversely impact? How does that dynamic work?
Overall, there's more rainfall in a warmer climate.
Okay.
In some regions, there would be more drought, but overall, there's rainfall.
What about, does that just mean higher propensity for flood? So flood mitigation, is much more.
Potentially, but there's no global trend in floods, no U.S. trend in floods, even in regions. Yeah.
Do you think that there's countless examples of flooding this year, right? Whether it was North Carolina, Texas, the tragedy in Texas. Do you just think, there's a lot of people that will tell me like, this has been going on since the beginning of time, but it's just beaten over our heads much more, right? There's much more coverage and consistent coverage over that. So we're just made aware of that. Like, how do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there have been horrendous floods historically, and a favorite one that I use in my book that also is included in the DOE report is in 1861, 1862, the winter. The atmospheric rivers that come in and produce a lot of rainfall in California and whatnot. In the winter of 1861-62, 15 feet of rain fell in the Central Valley, and they were flooded out, by 15 feet for months in the whole Central Valley of California.
Wow.
And they did some sedimentary analysis, and it seems these huge floods happen about every 200 years, and the 19th century one was by no means the largest one in the last 1,000 years. So, I mean, that's going to happen again.
Mm-hmm.
Will it be made a little bit worse by warming? It could be, but, whether it's 15 feet or 15.4 feet of rain.
It's still a lot of rain.
Well, a heck of a lot of rain that we need to figure out how to deal with it. And
one of the other things on that point, to expand upon that point, I read some of the reviews. Some were good, some were bad. As you can imagine, one of the more interesting ones, and once again, this is reflective in your book. Aggressive mitigation can be counterproductive. The report suggests that aggressive climate mitigation strategies may be misdirected and possibly more harmful than beneficial. Can you give me a couple of examples? The first thing that came to mind was taxation, right? You can't tax your way into prosperity. You can't tax your way into solutions. But when you talk about the misdirectiveness, that's even a word.
The urgency of net zero, that, we have to do this so quickly. The only thing we can afford to do is wind and solar.
Right.
And we've been adding wind and solar at great cost, which has destabilized our grid.
Right.
There's no way that wind and solar, and using up a whole bunch of land, having adverse ecosystem impacts. Wind turbines only last 15 years. Then you're stuck with these enormous, I don't know if you've ever driven down, I-80 or one of these big highways with these.
I've seen wind turbine cemeteries. It's insane.
Absolutely enormous. And, that there's this big wind turbine graveyard in Texas. It just...
Yeah. Wyoming has one, Texas, Arizona.
Made from fiber. You can't recycle them. I mean,
what was interesting, too, is like we did this analysis. I'm a massive proponent of natural gas and nuclear, and I actually have this personal thesis that natural gas will be the quote-unquote bridge to scale nuclear over the next decade or whatever it takes. And one of the many reasons outside of the emissions that I really like nuclear is its footprint, right? You need less than an acre per, I think, gigawatt hour, whereas wind, you need something like 30. It's some ridiculous footprint. But what we did was we looked at the anticipated electricity demand in 2030 because of data centers. We looked at the goals of the Biden administration. They wanted 80% wind, solar. We sort of just arbitrarily cut wind and solar to 40-40, right? 80%, just cut it evenly between wind and solar. If you wanted those proportions, you would need North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Colorado, and half of Montana, that land, all wind turbines to generate enough electricity to meet that demand. Like, we're just not going to do that. It's just obviously not, it's a pipe dream. It's not going to happen.
No, it's not going to happen. And, the problems with wind and solar aren't just with the intermittency. Right. It's with the asynchronicity of these power sources, and even battery storage is asynchronicity. You need frequency control. You need to keep it going.
Right.
Okay. And in order to do that, and gas and nuclear, these are synchronous power sources, continuous. And you can add all these complicated, expensive things to the transmission grid that may work. But it becomes extremely complicated to get beyond about 20 or 30% penetration of wind and solar, just because it destabilizes the grid so much. And batteries don't help the asynchronous. Even if you had enough battery, it doesn't help the asynchronicity problem.
I also, people think either overlook or don't even bother to understand the supply chain of wind and solar, which is a whole other conversation, right? That supply chain resides in China. They have kill switches on the technology. This is not conspiracy theory, Dan. Like, this is a real thing that's taking place. It is very reliant on China, which I am just not a fan of at all. But the other thing too, the report resonated with me for a variety of different reasons. But one of the things that stuck out the most, I make this argument in my presentations that if you want the world to decarbonize, just copy the blueprint of the United States, because we've expanded GDP per capita substantially for the last 40 years. And simultaneously, over the same period of time, we've decarbonized, right? And we've decarbonized immensely, probably more than any other country, given our economic output. And then you look at China and India, Brazil, Indonesia. You look at some of the other developing economies, and their emissions profile is through the roof, right? It's a rocket ship. And where I get frustrated when people are like, we need to do this and we need to do that. Okay, fine. But why are we letting China and India off the hook with their emissions profile when they control 40, 45% of emissions and we control 15? It seems to me like if there is a problem, you're going to go to the source or where the majority of the source of the problem resides.
Well, it's not letting them off the hook. It's just that they're not going to do it.
Right.
We're acknowledging that fact. And that you've got people in Europe and the U.S. under the Biden administration who said, we are going to do it.
Yeah.
There's no way that we can, the only clout that we have is not making loans to Africa to build power plants. Okay. You can't really, China and India can do it on their own. Okay. Yeah. And that was going to stop them from, we have been stopping Africa by not loaning them the money they need. But, it's just the Europeans are,
I think Europe is lost. I think Europe has lost their mind. Like I sit on the advisory, the advocacy committee for a group called Pragma, and they're predominantly European based, and they're doing an amazing job, right? They're doing advocacy work, promoting the merits of the fossil fuel industry. And they're actually, I would make the argument that they're actually making good progress. But when you talk to a European about fossil fuels, I've actually just stopped doing it. It's mind numbing. It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, no, I agree there. But, the coal to gas transition, is a huge one.
Yeah. And like most of this stuff, like most things, the market takes care of itself, right? If you just allow the market to do what the market does and have minimal interruption and have the government, I'm getting preachy now, act as a referee as instead of a player, like actually good things happen. Which goes one of the things that I had no idea about, like, and we talked about it a little bit, ocean chemistry. What's acidification of the ocean? What does that mean? And why is that important?
CO2, dissolved CO2. Okay, if you have a carbonated drink,
okay,
your Coca-Cola or what, it's acidic because of the carbon dioxide, the carbonation in it.
Okay.
And if you do too much, it'll eat away your tooth enamel.
Yeah, that's right. That's what we tell my kids. So that really is true.
Okay, now the ocean is fundamentally basic. It means it has a pH above 7, so it's basic. If the pH was below 7, it would be sort of acidic. So the average ocean alkalinity is 8.2. It's basic. And maybe over the last century, it's estimated to have dropped down to 8.1. So the alkalinity of the ocean has decreased a tiny bit. And so the advocates call that acidification.
Okay.
Which is a misnomer. I mean, but it's a tiny bit.
It sounds like apocalyptic, like the acidification. Like, oh shit.
Well, there's really not much to it. We got a lot of comments back from reviewers about the greening and agriculture and ocean acidification. We have to sort through them and decide what, if anything, we need to add. But those two sections got people upset. But they've been either ignoring the narrative in terms of the greening, global greening, or they've been pushing this ocean acidification narrative, which is really very misleading.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes total sense. So time for a fun game. You're no longer Judith Curry, PhD. You're Judith Curry, recognized ruler of the universe. What are some of the three things, like that title? What are some of the three things? What are the three things that you would do today to sort of just right this ship, right? If we want to ensure that the United States remains the global top dog economically, which means that we're the global top dog militarily, if we want to ensure a responsible system of land stewardship, and we want to ensure that we address the various ripple effects from energy poverty, like what are the top three things that we have to do?
Okay, if I get three things. First, it would be energy system R&D, and this includes transmission and the smart microgrids and all of this kind of stuff. We need a 21st century electricity infrastructure, that up to the task for, abundant, cheap, secure, clean, all that stuff. So we need that. I think that's already a priority. The next thing is I would worry about water. Too little, too much.
Yeah.
We need to manage our water resources. This is a key part of adaptation. I mean, some of the same regions are subject to floods and then droughts. There's reservoirs, there's dams, there's all sorts of strategies. Some places,
Let's not build data centers in the desert where there is no water.
I mean, retaliation, may be something that some regions.
Sorry to cut you off. Why is desalinization, you triggered me again. Presumably we're going to build a nuclear power plant on the moon. Why haven't we figured out desalination? And I can't even say it right.
Well, in the Middle East, they do that all the time. And South Australia, they do desalination. So the technology's there. So we can do it. You have to start with water in the first place, and that would be ocean water. So, usually coastal areas where desalination is meaningful. But, flooding and droughts and lack of water resources in the U.S. Southwest, and then we need to confront these problems. I can see water markets, all sorts of possibilities. And so, this makes sense. And I guess the third one would be dealing with real pollution. I mean, air, soil, and water pollution.
Yeah.
Not CO2 pollution, but real pollution, trying to keep things clean. But there's so many opportunities, and I think, for innovation and, technological innovations for adaptation related, I mean, not just energy, but also in adaptation, but also in information systems, small satellites and sensor webs and, all and better information systems, the way like Florida Power and Light operates, things like that. That there's tremendous opportunities rather than, that we can, for investors and for people, to really move forward, in the 21st century rather than to put on our hair shirt and not use any energy and, And so it's we need to have sort of an optimistic framework and a forward-looking framework and figuring out how we can use technology to, advance human thriving through the 21st century. So I think that's a mindset. But I think the whole water issue is an underappreciated one, and it's one that I think a lot of engineering and better emergency management could go a long way. Like all that stuff in South Carolina or North Carolina didn't have to happen.
Right.
The Tennessee Valley Authority has been charged with dealing with the flooding in that region, and they put in a lot of dams, but the people around Asheville didn't want that to happen, and then they got massively flooded out. So they need to go back to having Tennessee Valley Authority do what it's supposed to do.
Right.
No. So a major failing. Asheville's a lovely place. We used to have a house up there, but it got wiped out.
Oh, wow.
With the Helene floods. Oh,
yeah.
My gosh. It was really catastrophic. And the people on the hills, even outside the city, it was an absolute mess. So we need to have Tennessee Valley Authority go back and do its job.
Basics, get stuff done.
Managing the forest, not just the U.S., but the people in the upper Midwest have been plagued by smoke from Canada wildfires all summer, Though they're mismanaged. Canada's always had fires, but they've usually been farther north. We've had some, a little bit more in the southeastern part of Canada, which have just really been awful for air quality in the upper Midwest and Northeast. And so we need better forest management, all of these kind of things. Just better management of our environment,
Yeah.
I mean, make a lot of sense, but we've been so distracted from all of that by the existential threat of climate change that we've ignored all these other common sense priorities.
It is ironic that the rise of environmentalism has resulted in a decreased ability to manage the environment, right?
Well, okay, in the 1970s, I know this was decades before you were born, but the Greenpeace got their start with Save the Whales campaign.
Yeah.
Okay. Japan was overfishing and all that stuff. Now, okay, the whales are dying off the mid-Atlantic coast because of, direct and indirect effects of all the construction and offshore wind turbines and whatever. And Greenpeace's silence, climate change and wind power trumps everything.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But overall, right? I'm the eternal optimist. It sounds, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so correct me if I'm wrong. It does sound like you're optimistic on the current path. Like things do seem like they're getting better.
Well, the current path, I don't quite know what that is. I mean, I think the path that the Biden administration was on was disastrous.
Right.
It remains to be seen what path the Trump administration is on, other than energy abundance. Okay, I get that. That message is coming loud and clear. And they want to get rid of the endangerment finding, which, again, that's really a legal issue. But
are you, just from what you know of it, are you for or against that?
I don't think it makes any sense.
Does it make the endangerment itself, or getting rid of it doesn't make sense?
The whole endangerment finding doesn't make any sense, and I don't think we need to have an endangerment finding to have a sane energy policy. I just don't think why it's needed. It harkens back to that oversimplistic risk management approach of precautionary principle, showing it's dangerous and all of this kind of stuff. And that's just not the way to go for climate policy. It's just sort of an artifact of the 1990s risk management approach. So I just think in many ways it's irrelevant.
And then one last question. Can you confirm when the comment period? You said there's a couple more weeks left?
Yeah, it's 30 days.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it should be ending before the end of August, and then we'll go through them and revise the document and respond to the meaningful issues. And that'll take another 1 to 2 months.
Oh, wow. So it's still pretty quick. Okay. Well,
we move quickly.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming on. We plowed through over an hour and a half. We did about 100 minutes here, but it felt like 10. Hopefully feels that way. Maybe you're like, this was about bearable. I can't thank you enough, and definitely appreciate your perspective. Would love to have you on in the not too distant future, post comments, just to see how things are evolving. But from one UFCer to another UFCer, thank you, and looking forward to future conversations.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed talking with you.
Thanks.